Now we've got the Ferguson protests. So how are this going now in New York?
I've actually been to a few of those recently, and they're pretty big. People are really, really mobilized, and it feels like those protests are sort of pulling the corners of the left that don't always work together because everyone is like so deeply emotionally traumatized by what happened. What I'm really hoping is I'm hoping that the energy keeps up, because there's been at least, I would say, 5 to 10 of those protests a week in New York, and I'm hoping that everyone keeps their stamina up and it doesn't just sort of like fade into the background. But right now, I mean, the last one I was at, one of our city council members came out and gave a fairly radical speech about police violence and drawing parallels between what happened to Michael Brown and Ferguson and what happened recently in Staten Island when the NYPD strangled Eric Garner. So, and I think since Eric Garner happened so recently, and there's so many parallels between that and what happened to Michael Brown, that people are starting to make those connections, and then it makes it feel like a nationwide struggle because it's happening everywhere.
However, I am a little bit dismayed to some degree. I did a lot of work on the early reactions to the Trayvon Martin fallout surrounding the trial. The first night, mostly groups of people of color showed up at Union Square in response to the trial verdict the same night. And that was a time period that did not result in cross-cultural, cross-class, cross-racial coalitions. And I was really dismayed by that because I think the Trayvon Martin case especially shows that this is a widespread social and structural problem in the United States, whereas these issues recently in Ferguson and Staten Island can lend itself very easily to a sort of fuck the police sentimentality, which really only gets at inter-race and inter-class warfare, in the sense that if you think about who police are, they are the working class. We don't have a middle class anymore. They are people who are just following orders. They are trained and they do orchestrate the cultural of violence that they have been made to follow as a byproduct of their work. When it comes down to it, I think for big structural changes to happen, I'm not saying that the individual person shouldn't be held accountable. They absolutely should. I'm saying that we need to get at who's calling the shots at the top, who's allowing for this structure of violence, this culture of violence to continue to run workplaces. And I'm worried that people are considering the riots in Ferguson, and by riots I mean primarily police riots, and the responses, the reactions on behalf of a helpless people to be a point of organization when that's what riots specifically are not. Riots are not organized. They are a reaction to not having agency as citizens. It's a reaction to people being left out of the democratic process. It's a last cathartic effort to be heard in inhumane circumstances, and to try to capitalize on that as an organizational movement is not to hear the helplessness of the people when they cry, "We are not represented by this country."
You also drew some parallels with the genocide in Palestine and the genocide in America of black and brown youth.
Oh yeah.
How do you see those parallels and then the current situation in Gaza?
Well, I think with what goes on in Palestine, one of the really important things is the number of arms the United States sends to the Israeli army. And we send them incredible amounts of guns, bombs, anything they want. So we are essentially creating their militarized police force there and our militarized police force here. And, I mean, it's basically just violence and racist genocide all around, which the United States is complicit in on every front.
I mean, they're transmitting a culture of violence and essentially funding a culture of violence over in Palestine in the same way that is the way by which we manage our citizens here. We've actually started to invoke this sort of messaging already. There is a way of speaking about prisons that's becoming sort of mainstream, talking about jails and prisons as a literal third world within the two worlds, in addition to the two worlds that exist in the United States, the two worlds being the upper class and essentially the non-existent middle class, the working class, and the underclass, and then the third world being the prisons, an entirely different classless, stateless people. And in this way, people like Mamiya have started to talk about the prisons needing to be paralleled to what's going on in Palestine in the same way that in the 60s the Panther Party sought communion and sought unity with the experience going on in Palestine or in apartheid as well.
I also think people are starting to draw a lot of parallels between what happens inside the jails, because I mean, we do a lot of work around Rikers Island, and there's a lot of racist violence that happens inside and then that happens on the streets with shootings and beatings, and then also the violence of racists targeting people to put them in jail. And my understanding, at least, is that all of that happens in a similar way in Palestine, and it's a way of keeping a people that is an underclass to remain an underclass.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we do a poor job in the United States, generally speaking, in remembering our recent histories, in the sense that yesterday when I was invited by Abby Martin to be on RT, I followed the immediate story on Ferguson, where they were talking about the unprecedented nature and the way they were treating the press, locking up the press, like 10 to 15 journalists have been jailed. And I was sitting there thinking, I remember being arrested twice in Occupy and being in the back of a van with press, you know, and in this sense, like, there are recent histories from Ferguson to Occupy to Seattle before it, back to, you know, the 60s, and the ways in which our government is often utilizing various tactics to shut down freedom of the press, to make it a global issue, to spur on violence, to spur on divisions in other countries for our economic gain. Those things are utilized here as well, and often. And it's a matter of, when we do not pay attention to the recent histories, when we do not compile a large sense of the continuous removal of our rights and privileges here, it's difficult for us to make those parallels to what we're doing globally. And so I think a lot of what Lucy and me and Paul, our team, are trying to do is constantly contextualize these incidences as not singular incidences, but how they exist as part of a 50-year reign of corporate domination in our country, slowly receding our rights, but also globalize the context of how we've been doing that internationally. It's really difficult. Americans are incredibly prideful, and while we talk a lot about these concepts of freedoms and rights, it doesn't seem to me that most people have a sense of what that really means in practice.
So you said you entered prison as part of the Occupy movement, and you left prison as an advocate of the prison reform movement. So how do you actually see the continuation of the Occupy movement in the context of the prison reform, and perhaps the combination of these two into something that will be more encompassing of the current social structure?
Well, I think that the Occupy movement still exists in this, not in the sense that it is on the ground, not in the sense that it is a tactile movement that is emerging, but it exists in the sense that we have started a class dialogue, we have started a class commentary, we have anytime we're talking about a corporatocracy, anytime we're talking about corporate control of our democracy, the lack of a middle class, the sinking of the working class into an underclass, that is the Occupy movement. And when you layer that into the prison justice movement, what you get is a move from human rights and racism into a class dialogue. So you can really contextualize the problem as it on the many layers that affect what prison justice is. Like right now in New York, it's very difficult for us to get beyond the targeting of black and brown men. That is the strongest reality here. But for the United States over, there are many, many poor white people who are being targeted just the same in other prisons and other jails throughout the United States. And so in this sense, it's important to recognize that there is a human rights violation, that there is a corporate value to keeping people in prisons, that there is a financial value to keeping people in private prisons, that there is a racist marker on black and brown men in particular that sends them through those systems, but it is also for those black and brown men, as well as for poor white youth throughout the United States, a class-based issue, which comes back around to the corporate discussion of what the problem is here.
Yeah, I think it's been really good at uniting the dialogues of race and class are really important, because so much of racism is tied up in class politics, and so much of like the racist system we have is built to keep people of color poor, and then uniting them also with the poor white people, and then I don't know, and then bringing it back to Wall Street and the strong like 99% motto of Occupy against the banks. I think it draws the strong connection and is a way to make sure that the blame is put where it's deserved, which is on the corporatocracy.
It's also the first real shot at a true concept of we are the 99%, which is essentially what we need in order to build a true civil rights era styled social movement. And what I mean is not that we are going to necessarily work by the same model of the civil rights movement, but in order for such a movement to take hold in our country and make real changes, then there needs to be multiple arenas of accessibility, from, like Lucy just said, the bottom up to accessibility of the left into working towards building a social movement, which is where you can get with the class and human rights. So it really is the first point of merging the various people that are asking for change into a cross-race, cross-cultural, cross-class, and now we're adding with our work at Rosie's cross-gender social movement, which is what you have to have in order to have a social movement. It can't be a minority of people, because that's a campaign. A movement allows for access to all.
You've recently delivered the petition and got a sit-down meeting with Commissioner Ponte on the 25th of August.
Yeah.
So are you happy about it, and what are you expecting to get out of this meeting?
Oh man, that was huge. Like, city council persons, public advocates, everybody has been talking about how difficult it is to get a sit-down meeting with Commissioner Ponte. We were so surprised. We went there not expecting for a full-on meeting. We went there expecting to wait him out until he showed up to take our petitions. To get a sit-down meeting is a win beyond anything we could imagine, but it just goes to show you that 25 people who are recognized as people, who are recognized with the rights of citizens, that if they go across that bridge, if they make the move to stand by people, prisoners that are being held on Rikers, that is so terrifying to them that people would actually go so far out of their way to literally stand by people in prisons that, I mean, they were just so ready to get us off that island.
Yeah.
That is what they offered us.
Yeah, and the police, one thing that struck me about the petition delivery was the police presence was incredible. I mean, it was a petition delivery. It's a very peaceful action. We announced very publicly that it would be very peaceful. We had around 25 people, which is not huge, but they still outnumbered us with police officers. They set up barricades. They shut down the normal bus stop that goes right across the bridge to Rikers because they knew that's where we were gathering, and we had to gather at a different bus stop. I mean, they brought out the like drug and bomb dogs. The officers were wearing riot gear. When we went onto the island to deliver the petition, we were surrounded by officers.
We were quarantined on the bus.
Yeah, and like what that really shows is exactly how scared of us they are. And I think that that is really frightening, and then we've seen a lot of beatings, and we've seen a lot of people go to jail,
and we were on Rikers.
And we were on Rikers. But it's also really empowering in that we know that something we are doing is working, and they feel threatened by it.
And that's, I think, where we have to get to right now in social movement building in our country, is that we need to start recognizing the tactics of the government and the tactics of the police as a marker of our power when they show up in force and in mass like this. We need to expect it, we need to plan for it, and we need to go about campaigns in an actionable way. What are we going to do if they do X, Y, and Z? How far are we going to go? If we get shut down, how are we going to come back? What are their weaknesses? What are they afraid of? And I think right now, to a large degree, we're still really caught up in spectacle. We still don't seem to have a sense of our agency as a mass of people who are becoming more and more united in our discontent and our dissent against this country. And by this country, I mean the people who run it. And by the people who run it, I mean the corporations.
The 1%?
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Why else would the poorest people, the most marginalized people, and I don't just mean by color, I mean by class, I mean by sexuality, I mean by gender, why would those people be the target in our country of such widespread oppression and aggression if it weren't the 1%? Because when it comes down to it, all of those minority groups make up a majority. This country is not majority white men, and certainly not rich white men.
Yeah.
It's a 1%.
Cecily, regarding your trial, your coordinated trial, I would like you to tell me what experience did you got out of it, and in which ways did that experience combines with the Chelsea Manning's court support that you were part of, I believe.
Well, this is actually the mastermind of our court support effort. I was supportive of Chelsea Manning, of course, but court support is a nuanced level of, I would call it, direct action. Mm-hmm. I'm advocating ultimately that from the moment you step onto the street to the moment you go to jail to the moment that you go to court, that you as an activist must follow through with your convictions and not plead out. Less than 5% of felony cases right now go to trial, and when I was in Rikers, I was the only person that I met my entire time there who had been to trial. And so we have a privilege beyond anybody else to stand trial, to expose the justice system for what it is. And the big lesson here is, if you choose to give up your cultural privilege, if you choose to not take the pathway of striving to become a part of the 1%, then if you choose to stand by people of color and poor folks and people who have been marginalized, then you will be treated like one. Your cultural privilege or white privilege or class privilege will be removed from you and will not save you from jail. That is very clear here. But nonetheless, you as a byproduct of that privilege, that you have the best fighting shot to expose the justice system for what it is, another arm of the corporatocracy, you must, as a point of your values, as a point of your commitment as an organizer, go to trial and possibly go to jail.
Yeah, and to touch a little bit more on the Chelsea Manning trial, we actually didn't build our court support model off that quite as much, partly because, I mean, that court case is so different in so many ways, in that Chelsea Manning was on trial for something that she was able to make a conscious choice in doing, and then Cecily was on trial for something that happened to her. And then also Chelsea Manning was in military court, and we were in Manhattan State Court, I guess it was. But We also did have one of the people on the support team had gone down to Texas to do court support for the Chelsea Manning trial. We had a sketch artist actually who had sketched the Chelsea Manning trial extensively, who came to do some sketches of this trial. So we drew some parallels, but not a whole lot in terms of court support, other than packing the courts and trying to get press attention and all of that. Yeah. I think we drew more on like the court support model from, say, C.C. McDonald.
I think ultimately what we'd like to utilize court support for is to build constantly more avenues into supporting the left, standing up for our rights. It is a, because you're going to court, because it's not in the streets, because you're not generally surrounded by police, the final days.
Not always.
It's a way for people to, it's a low level of accessibility into a movement that allows people to see what they thought were secured and safeguarded rights to every citizen, right to a speedy trial, right to trial by jury, innocent until proven guilty. It's a way for people to very viscerally and very easily see the cracks in our system firsthand as they're sitting there and they relate to the individual who is being tried. It's one of the most alienating experiences, not only for a defendant, but for the people sitting in the audience. I guess it's a fucking absurd play is what it is. And so I think we wanted people to show up and turn out. Specifically,
it's a civics lesson.
It's a civics lesson. And it's also a chance to get more and more people amassed into a conversation about the larger dialogues going on. And we also hope that that model will be transferable to any single person and our movement that falls. And in that sense, it has a sort of unifying effort right now in the very fractured left.
Yeah. Lucy, what are the difficulties you encountered upon coordinating the actions of Justice for Cecily support team? And did you find stronger support from within the United States or from abroad?
Let's see, I'll start with the first part of that, I guess.
For mispronouncing Cecily, I'm really sorry.
It's all good. Challenges we faced were, it was a lot of work, and the trial lasted for a month, so it was going in at least 3 to 4 days a week, every week for a month for the entire court support team, and half of us are students, the other half of us had real jobs, so literally I would sit down every night, and we always had someone outside the courtroom to greet people, give them flyers, talk to them about etiquette, and I literally would have to sit down every night before the next day of court and draw out a master schedule of when everyone had to leave to go to class or work, who could be there when. We also, some days we faced challenges of not having enough people there. By the end, we faced the challenge of having way too many people there. So dealing with people waiting in the hallway, dealing with not talking to the jury, which was a big struggle, especially when we were coming back from lunch. Cecily and I would often end up in the security line behind the jurors. But really, everyone was incredibly supportive, and everyone banded together to help us in ways that I'd never seen before. We were able to provide food. We had very little negative press coverage. I do think that the support came more from the United States, and actually across the entire United States. Like, we had a petition that got 200,000 signatures on it. And then we also had a decent amount of international support. I know we had a lot of articles published in Latin America about the trial, a lot of articles in Vietnam, actually, about the trial.
London. The Guardian was the best.
Yeah, The Guardian did also a lot of the best coverage. So I think the main challenge we faced, honestly, was tiredness, burnout, and lack of time, especially after the verdict came down and we had 2 weeks to organize this leniency campaign, which came down to working 20 hours a day, every day for 2 weeks after this incredibly emotionally traumatizing event. So it was really tiring.
We had no sense of what we were really up against. I think to a degree all of us did still have an idea, did still want to believe that there was some sort of justice in the justice system. That
we had a lot of optimism.
Yeah, it was really shocking.
We're also everyone on the court support team was very young. I'm 19. Most folks were around, I want to say, between 21 and 25, with a few folks who were 31 and 32.
And a few
so,
folks
like, all
who
around.
were 19.
Yeah, a few folks who were also 19. So we had a lot of naivete, and that worked against us in a lot of ways. But it also worked for us in some ways, in that I think when you don't have an experience that tells you that what you're doing is not going to work, then you're more likely to believe that it will work, and then you're more likely to be able to make it work.
And when it doesn't work, I mean, it breaks your heart in a way that allows you to see the system for what it is and say, well, fuck you, you're not going to get us down, we're going to figure out another fucking way. And so with the upcoming trial on September 15th, as a result of a targeted arrest while I was awaiting trial, we will go forward with the same court support model again, but of course this time we are considering jury nullification. So, I mean, I think that that's got to be a process. The fact that none of the jurors, like, I don't know how, I have no idea how they considered that somebody who is being convicted of a violent felony would not go to jail for it. But the fact that they weren't told that the general sentence for a violent felony is 2 to 7 years, 2 years being the mandatory minimum if you've met all your standards, which the DA's office did in their sentencing speech. The entire speech was geared up to ask for the mandatory 2 years. But because of the petition campaign, because of the political campaign, because of the rallies, because of the widespread support nationally and internationally, they did suggest instead 3 months, despite the jury writing in and saying, oh my God, you're going to send this girl to jail? You can't do that.
They also didn't tell the jury, there was one juror actually who came to the press and admitted that he still believed she was innocent at the end of jury deliberation. He just didn't realize that it was okay for there to just be one person that thinks the defendant is innocent, and that like jury is supposed to be a unanimous decision, not a majority decision. And to quote him, he went with the guilty verdict because he didn't want to fight a losing battle, and also didn't know that she was facing serious prison time.
Well, also, yeah, I mean, the sense that he had fighting a losing battle, he wasn't fighting a losing battle. He was fighting, I mean, he wasn't fighting. He believed I was innocent, and had he just maintained that position, then it would have been held a mistrial. And in a mistrial, there would have been, so in a hung jury, there would have been a chance for the trial to have been redone, at which juncture we would not have gotten the same judge. We wouldn't have had actually the same DA because she was like right about to pop.
She's pregnant,
yeah,
is what Cecily's trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, we would have had an opportunity to get in all of the evidence that had been edited out by the court. Now, as we're fighting the appeal, we're not going to be able to get in. We're going to have to go forward with the case with the same evidence that was presented. Whereas in a hung jury retrial, then we would have been able to actually have a shot at presenting all the evidence that was left out.
So I guess actually another challenge we faced with court support was actually somewhat of a feeling of hopelessness, in that there was so little we could do for the outcome of the trial because it was so
rigged.
Much up. Yeah, it was rigged by the judge, and then it was also up to the lawyers. And I mean, one thing we did was we helped Cecily's lawyer compile evidence, but in terms of getting that evidence into the courtroom, in terms of swaying the jury, there was practically nothing we could do, and that was one of the most disempowering things about this organizing project.
But it's also another thing that for the first time has allowed us to experience, as, you know, not all of us are white or from upper class backgrounds. I'm certainly not, and Lucy doesn't fit that bill either. But we do have an upper middle class to upper class cultural privilege. And for the first time, we threw all of that out there. We had the right dresses, we had the right clothes, we had the right marketing, we had the right messaging, we had the right press, all the way to the New York Times. We had the right lawyers. We had the right city council person supporting us, the mayor's office. We had the petitions. We did everything by the book, right? Because the rules are made for people like us. And we thought if we followed them and we did them to an exemplary level, then we would win. For the first time, I think that the trial got so much attention and press because so many people recognized within us the privilege and the agency that they have themselves and take for granted, and that all of that put forth an exemplary style did not save my ass. So I think that it was good for us, and it allows us to connect with this prison justice movement in a way that is more organic rather than like paternalistic or patronizing, because we do understand what it means to have just done everything as right as we could have and got fucked over for it anyway.
So you're currently on probation for 5 years. And
yeah.
You're a felon, so you can't vote for the next 7 years.
Oh, there's so much more than that. I mean, I have 3 teacher certifications. Most of my life, I've worked with children. Before this, was an Upper East Side nanny. Even in jail, I was a suicide prevention aide to the adolescents in Rosamond Senior Center. I've always worked with children. I had always wanted to possibly become a foster parent. So I can't work with children at all as a felon in any public institution. I don't think I can even work actually at McDonald's. We were looking at houses in Atlanta the other day, the other team member and I, Paul, and so many of the housing requirements say no felons, don't even ask. I mean, actually, as if per my probation, cannot have any contact with the police. If I have any contact with the police, I have to report it. So we now have to consider what actions, what marches I can go to. There's certain events that I can't go to on the left anymore because if there is another felon there, part of our probation is that we cannot interact with other felons. I mean, I can't move without notice. I can't leave leaving the country doesn't even seem feasible. I can't leave the state unless I give 45 days notice to the judge, and the only way that I can leave otherwise is with 45 days given to the supervisor of probation in the event that there is a family emergency, a death in the family, or a medical emergency.
It's a new type of jail time, and it's also 5 years probation is so long. Usually when they give that type of probation, what they're trying to say is that they really want to send her back to jail because they didn't get away with giving her the long sentence they wanted to the first time. And they're trying to do that in a quieter way, and a way in which they can assassinate her character even further.
It's a setup. I mean, everybody in Rosamond Senior Center said 5 years probation. That's a setup. Everybody knows it and calls it what it is. It's a setup. I have to go in every month to do a hand scan, which monitors if I have been using any drugs. I don't. That's good. But I have to, I mean, the probation officer can show up at any point at my home, at my workplace. They can ask me to come by at any time. I mean, if they would like to use me for some sort of radical left GPS system, they can. They can give me a curfew. They can make me quit a job if they don't see it as a reputable job. If I'm not working or not in school, I go back to jail. If I don't have a residency that's stable, I go back to jail.
Yeah, sounds like a setup. Is there a chance of it changing after the 17th of September?
I could get more probation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the new trial will only make things worse. There's a chance if we win the appeals case, then the probation will be gone because then we'll have an innocent verdict. And we actually petitioned...
No, not an innocent verdict. If we win the appeals case, the probation will be gone and we will have an opportunity for a retrial.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and then... I was going to say something else. I lost it.
It's not an innocent. I guess, yeah, I'm acquitted, but they can retry me.
Oh, yeah, and we petitioned several times after the verdict for Cecily to be let out on bail pending appeals because we were like, there were a lot of things that were legally wrong that happened in this trial, and we're taking it to appeals. If there's a chance of an appeals case and a chance of a retrial, then why does she have to serve her whole jail sentence before then? But every time we petitioned for bail pending appeals, we got shot down by the judges with no explanation. Literally, once the transcript shows there were the arguments, and then the judge went to lunch, and then just came back and said no with absolutely no explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it presents a coordination that is like for us, like beyond imagination. Like I mean, it's hard to think about without feeling paranoid, but I think unfortunately the paranoia is the reality here. I mean, the way that they're handling this upcoming case, and I can't talk about it that much because I'm going to trial, is identical to the way that the following case was handled. And my lawyer has said point blank, if you go to trial, you will likely be found guilty, and if you are found guilty, then they will most likely send you back to jail.
Cecily, regarding the conditions at Rikers that you revealed, I was really shocked, particularly about the denial of basic medical treatment for the inmates and how mental health issues are treated.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, I can only speak on behalf of what it's like in, you know, women in jail, and particularly Rikers jail, but because women do not have the same opportunities for violent coordinated force, and in that sense the riots in jails do have to be coordinated, because we're women, and that means physically, but also that means in the sense that we do have to get in and we have to get out to go home to take care of our communities, and especially for the women that are in there, the communities that have also been left fatherless, because all the men, all the brothers, all the fathers are in Rikers. Women do tend to get in and get out, and so they're not really coordinated or organized. Therefore, we don't have as much retaliation, I guess, on behalf of the COs in terms of like violent retaliation. However, our biggest form comes in the daily, every moment aspects of neglect. Medical neglect, mental health neglect, and then violence is on behalf of the doctors. So there is a story that we're investigating inside right now that is the rampant experience of women being forced to trade sexual favors for medications. Doctors coming in and saying, your chromosomal count seems off. That's not a thing. Genetic testing is like really expensive, and they do not do that on Rikers Island. But your chromosomal counts are seriously off here, and I'm going to need you to pull down your panties, and I'm going to need to fill you up to see if you really are a woman or if you're a man. Without a female nurse present, this has been done to several women that I've spoken to, 2 alone in the same room that I was in, which in Rikers Island Rosensinger Center, my room was about 40 to 50 women. There are approximately 1,100 women. So if you think in those terms, how many? The daily, I mean, I would say 75% of the women in any given dorm that I was in was on mental health medications, at which anybody who had any sort of disorder or presented with any disorder or presented with any maladjustment, meaning if you weren't happy to be on Rikers Island, then they put you on sedatives that were so strong that I ended up losing my memory for 3 days. So I went through 3 days that I don't have any idea what actually happened because I was so sedated. Then there's the very, very typical aspect of having to wait for medical attention. You go down to sick call, which is the general doctor, and I never got in to see a doctor in less than 6 hours. That was a good day. On average, I would say you wait about 10 hours. It's definitely not unheard of for you to wait 12. It is pretty frequent that you'll wait all 12, not get seen, and have to go back the following day and the day after that and the day after that before you see anybody. And when you get in and you see a doctor, they say, what do you want? A lot of them don't speak English. A lot of them don't listen to you at all. It is commonplace for you to be prescribed the wrong medication. As you're prescribed it, you have to wait another 2 or 3 days before you go to the pharmacy to get that medication. If you have anything that's not general, then you have to see a specialist. Something very easy to explain is I had an ingrown toenail that had gotten infected, and he said, I can't do anything about you. I can't do anything about that. Well, you're a general doctor. Yes, you can. But I have to send you to a podiatrist, and that could take a couple of weeks. Well, I waited 3 weeks, and I never saw a podiatrist. So that's a toenail. Imagine if you have an ulcer. Imagine if you have diabetes. Imagine if you have cancer. Imagine if you have a tumor. And I'll tell you about Ida, who did have a tumor. She had a very aggressive form of cancer in her throat that she went to a doctor. They cut it out. She was just barely saved and had been in remission for a couple of years, and came in and said, first thing when she was admitted, I have to see a doctor, an oncologist, every 3 months to get checked to make sure that I'm not relapsing back into cancer. They didn't check her for 6 months. She started to feel a lump here that became larger and larger. She began losing her voice. She begged for 9 weeks, every week, and sometimes up to 3 times a week to get it biopsied. Never biopsied it. That's enough to kill a person.
Are there any statistics on the amount of people that are actually dying in prison?
Okay, now this is the most fucked up part. Judith, the woman that ended up as a byproduct of medical neglect dying, that I had met while she was in Rikers. She had been throwing up blood violently for hours as doctors came up. She was delusional. She was not able to make medical choices for herself. She had already been in the infirmary for 2 weeks. She was a known hepatitis C carrier with a known liver problem. The doctors came up. She was completely out of her mind, didn't know the difference between her bed and other beds, the bathroom, the pantry. She didn't want to go with them for obvious reasons. They had been denying her medication. And they said, okay, well, she denied medication, or she denied medical treatment, so we're not going to take her down. She's literally throwing up chunks of blood when she hasn't eaten in like 2 days. So we're thinking it's her liver. The inmates rally together, bring her down into the infirmary, and we're like, this isn't a medical emergency. You have to take her to the doctor. Like, that's unprecedented for inmates to do that. We show up, or two of the girls show up with Judith, and the doctor says, ha, you call that a medical emergency? She's admitted to the hospital, put in critical care. 2 weeks later, she's dead. Her autopsy shows death unknown. Every single one of her organs had shut down, had been totally destroyed. Her lungs collapsed. There was no reason that all of that would have enacted given the way that she had presented when she came into the jail. Now, how do we know that? Her sister got into contact with me. How did her sister get into contact with me? She's in Florida. Her sister is also a correctional officer. She found out that her sister had died when she had sent her sister a letter, and the letter had been returned, inmate no longer here. So she went online and looked up, and it said that her sister was in the hospital. She got into touch with her sister about 2 days before she died. Never talked to her sister again because she wasn't able to talk. She talked to the brother who went over. She literally would not have ever known that her sister had died had she had not gone online and researched that she was in the hospital, had her brother not been available to go to the hospital and be there with her. She would not have ever known what happened to her sister. It would have never been reported had I not had the good fortune of being able to publish the story in the New York Times. And when she was looking up Rikers Island, after she had tried desperately to get a civil rights lawyer to look into it and had been denied several times, she was looking online at Rikers for information, stumbled upon my story, said, could that be my Judith? Contacted the New York Times. Michael Schwartz and Michael Winrip gave her my phone number. She called me, and I told her what happened. So it's like, if you can imagine all of those really lucky coincidences that led to her knowing what her sister's life was like in her final days, how many people have that sort of luck? How many people have those sorts of opportunities? How many people get out of jail or prison and are published in the New York Times? I'm terrified to know how many people actually do die in Rosa Singer Center when there's a lack of inmate organization, when there's a lack of resources, when there's a lack of attention, when our country seems to be covering up the fact that women are even in prisons, except in a funny show like Orange is the New Black. And we're going to figure out what those numbers are as we continue to investigate Rosa Singer Center. But
and whatever numbers we find, the real numbers will probably be higher.
Yeah. We're terrified of the consequences.
Yeah.
Cecily, you were visited while in prison by Nadia, Masha, and Peter, formerly of Pussy Riot, now having their NGO Zona Prava. So how was that for you, and how is your current communication with them in the context of prison reform, both in the U.S. but also around the world?
I love them. I mean, really, it has been one of the most alienating experiences to get out of jail and go back to a world where most of my friends have not been to jail and do not have a lot of experience with the cultures that surround imprisonment. It's been sort of alienating to navigate what it is supposed to be a woman, a white woman speaking on these topics. It's been really hard, and while my friends Lucy, I mean, obviously she's incredible, try very hard to understand the trauma associated with that, the alienation, the difficulty in sort of figuring out who I am now after that experience. I hung out with Nadia and Masha and Peter a couple Sundays ago for an entire day. We just went down to Battery Park, and Peter made us chase a boat for a really long time. And we're just 25-year-old girls trying to do something right for this world, trying to make something more out of an experience that I think we all realize is really super commonplace for a lot of people in this world. But we're still like 24, 25, and 26-year-old girls, you know? And so it's been amazing to have them as comrades. And in terms of the international piece, we are really looking forward to to working on something sort of like from Rikers to Russia narrative that will start the international interconnectivity of discussing prisons as a human rights violation from particularly a woman's perspective, which we think hasn't been done and will be more fruitful because women are socialized generally to be more community-building, communal beings. We're both of our teams are really committed to discourse and collaboration rather than competition and setting up an us and them. We'd like to make it a human we narrative. And I think that moving forward, we are just, I think, all around delighted to work together.
The other thing about Nadia, Masha, and Peter is they actually became a large part of the leniency campaign, which is why Cecily is out of jail now. When they went and visited her at Rikers, I want to say it was the first weekend she'd been in. First visit. And they came and had breakfast with the support team in the morning, and then I rode over to Rikers with them. We talked about politics. It's actually almost strange because our politics are so aligned with what their politics are. Like, we weren't expecting it. But then they went in and visited Cecily and came out and were so amazed that they then utilized all of the resources that they had as a part of the petition campaign to get her out, and also as a part of the campaign we had of writing letters to the judge asking for that leniency. So really, if they hadn't been so wonderful in putting forward all of their resources and energy on that, Cecily might still be at Rikers.
We also have a running dialogue about this concept that they said, anti-fear. In the sense that when there is terror, when there is police repression, when there is backlash, that's not a marker of weakness on your behalf. That's a marker of strength. When they fear you, if you can respond with anti-fear, you win. Because at the end of the day, all they have is their guns, and all they have is their money. But if you present and you win out as a human being who's willing to stand up against the money and against the guns and maintain your personhood, maintain your dignity, maintain your respect, maintain your personal narrative as somebody who's just trying to do good for others, you win. And yeah, the consequences grow greater and greater as you become more successful. But at the end of the day, I mean, what is living if this is the world that we're living in?
Talk to me about October month of resistance to mass incarceration.
Yeah, so we're working with these folks with an organization, Stop Mass Incarceration Network, which has been working. It was started by Cornel West and Carl Dix, who are both great folks, and has been working for a few years. And they're now putting together this October month, which is it's becoming clearer and clearer that something big needs to happen around mass incarceration and police violence now. And there are literally in New York probably at least 100 different groups doing work around this. And what we're aiming to do and working with Stop Mass Incarceration Network in October is pull together those groups under a loose heading of this month of resistance to show how many people are doing work and to start coordinating so that it becomes a real movement, and also doing outreach, pulling people in. I mean, I think the mass of America is becoming more and more aware, especially with books like The New Jim Crow, of the reality of the prison system. And then in October, we also need to show how many people are doing work around it and get even more people involved, because there is the potential for an actual movement around it. We just need to pull together and we need to energize people. And I don't think that we will win anything specifically with October. We're not aiming to. What we're aiming to do is create coalitions and do outreach and then build into something way bigger in the future.
To mobilize people from all the various angles as well, not only all the groups, but all the various angles. The anti-mass incarceration movement is a structural movement, because you can't just target the prisons. You have to target the prosecutorial overreach. You have to target the appointment of judges by elected officials that are elected by money. You have to target the lack of resources that lead people into prisons out of class and out of classism and racism and oppression to begin with. You have to go at the back end, the lack of resources, the probation, the sort of statelessness that I was talking about. You have to address the statelessness of an entire class of people in our country in a way that requires, again, cross-class, cross-race, cross-cultural, and cross-gender coalitions. And that's really, really powerful. I mean, additionally, I think that it requires an inside-outside strategy, and I mean that on dual levels. I mean that it requires radicalism outside of institutional politics, but it also requires inside organization and actions in the prisons and outside support. It requires people to become more coordinated in a really serious way, and I think that it will be the first major step into uniting the 99% in a way that we haven't seen actualized yet, just verbalized. And one way we're trying to get out this beforehand is by calling it what it is. This isn't just racism. This isn't just classism. This is political repression. When there is a government that specifically denies participation to an entire group of people and thus renders them stateless, thus renders them unable to participate as citizens to begin with, and then you put them in jail for that, that's political repression. These are political prisoners. And so I think that there lies within that narrative a possibility at mass political activation in a way that could work through a series of rolling movements, work to win massive structural changes that we want to see in our national government. We're in it to win it. I mean, we have a sense of revolution. Our revolution isn't violent guerrilla warfare, but our revolution is to live the rest of our lives affecting movement after movement after movement until we unite more and more people that are not represented by this government, which is most of the people, to affect a government that will not only be more respectful of the citizens here, but respectful of the world order that so many other countries are working avidly to create through the UN that we continually undermine.
And as a final question to that, what would be your ideal view for a correctional system? How would it function and feel? And if you could paint the picture with words, what would that be?
No correctional system.
Yeah, ultimately, and we haven't had the time to have these political sessions, so we maybe have slightly, well, I think we have similar views. At least what I would like to see is eventually no jails, no prisons. It's not effective at creating a better society. I think it will be a slow process to get there, and I think that to build that society, the society that functions without them, you absolutely have to address, especially the huge class issues. And what I would like to see is more of a process of restorative justice, where if someone does something like steal something, then it's viewed as a community harm, and what you would have to do is work to pay the person back, not go to jail, which is a dehumanizing experience. It generally, at least in my understanding, doesn't make you a better person. When you get out, you have so many fewer opportunities.
It's also costly.
Yeah,
to
it costs
us.
a lot of money. But, I've heard so many stories, because I also used to teach in the men's facility at Rikers, of people who went in for dealing drugs because they couldn't find employment that would pay them as well, and they had to support their families, and then got let out, and no one would give them a job because they'd been to jail. So of course what you're going to go back to is dealing drugs. And we need to address it in a way that actually builds a better, more productive society that is built on growth rather than punishment.
I mean, to be honest, in the entire time that I was in the sentencee dorm, so that's the women that have been sentenced at Rikers, I had by far the highest, most violent offense. The classes of women that I met there were generally one of four. I would say there's only a handful of women that were there for something else. One being selling their bodies in order to feed themselves or their families. Two was theft in some form or another in order to take care of themselves or their families. The third is addiction. And the fourth is, primarily mental health. So, of those four, that to me seems like those are not crimes, those are byproducts of our society that to me say a really violent form of poverty and a really violent form of alienation, in which actually left them no choice to do otherwise.
Yeah, and those aren't crimes, those are modes of survival.
And I think ultimately what I would like to see the prison justice systems replaced with are rehabilitation systems. I think when somebody in our society commits a crime, it is because for whatever reason the society as it is not functioning for them. It is not working for them, or they cannot see their place within it, or they have not been given the avenues or the resources in order to participate in society. That was certainly true of my case. There was no avenue for us to address the government, so we started a social movement, right? And so I guess what needs to happen is we need to say, why is this person not participating to the standards that we've set? Do we need to change the standards? Do we need to allow for more access to resources? Do they need therapy? Do they need food? Do they need more adequate housing? There's no sense of talking to people about why it is that they committed the crime that they committed. It's just all of a sudden you were a person and now you're a number, and numbers don't have opinions or value.
So basically, to sum it up, we want no jails, no prison. We want everyone to be fed, clothed, housed, and taken care of to the extent that we deserve to be as human beings.
And that our country can afford. Our country can't afford. We spend more money on housing a prisoner, and I think it's something like 5 times as much in housing a prisoner per year than we do on the average child in public schools. That's crazy. We're paying to put people in an inefficient system that just sends them back. Any way you cut it, conservative, all the way to extremely progressive to radical, this system doesn't benefit us. It doesn't benefit anybody, except for maybe the private prison systems who are making a profit off of the people being there. It's crazy. This is 21st century.
So equal access to resources seems to be part of the solution, but at the same time, we have the private prison system that is part of the larger corporatocracy, and a way around it should be found as well.
Which, I think we'll start with improving the conditions in jail right now, building those cross-class, cross-cultural, cross-race, cross-gender connections, building ever towards a common dialogue on human rights, for every person, regardless of where they are, deserves to be treated like a person, and what we perceive will erupt with the prison justice movement as it begins to interconnect with the student debt movement, as it begins to interconnect with the immigrant rights movement. I think ultimately what we're going to see is a social movement of some kind, of some
something pretty big.
It's coming. It's bubbling. That's clear. Ferguson is valuable in that it is seen as a marker of mobilized dissent coming, and that people are no longer content to be treated like others and are responding in a way that says no more. That says we will not stand anymore. We will not stand by, avert our eyes, keep our heads down, and not look up and not stand up for our brothers and our sisters.
Yeah.
It's coming. And we hope, and you know, the privilege that we have as American citizens, the duty that we have as American citizens, as our country terrorizes, rapes, harms, threatens, and exploits so many other countries worldwide and the UN to boot. We don't even want to go into the IMF. Ultimately, we start a strong social movement here based on human rights, based on a cross-class dialogue. We're hoping that what has historically followed will continue to do so, and we'd love to see, obviously, a series of mass uprisings throughout the world to establish a new world order that is focused on organizing the people, for the people, and by the people.
That's a great message to conclude with. Thank you so much for this interview. And what can I say? I will see you in the streets.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Always.
And it's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.